Hey guys, tonight we're exploring a story that everyone in history should know. The story is, what was Gen Z culture really like in medieval China? You get comfortable, take a moment, like the video, and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. What was Gen Z culture really like in medieval China? Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to be 16 years old in medieval China? Imagine waking before sunrise, not to the sound of a phone alarm or a buzzing notification, but to the crowing of roosters echoing across a village surrounded by rice fields. Your day has already been planned long before you were born. Your family expects you to work, your elders expect you to obey, and society already knows what kind of person you are supposed to become. At first glance, it sounds like the complete opposite of modern Generation Z. No social media, no memes, no online trends, no streaming platforms, no smartphones. But if you look deeper into the lives of young people who lived hundreds of years ago, a surprising picture begins to emerge. Their world was different, but many of their emotions were remarkably familiar. Teenagers in medieval China laughed together, competed with one another, worried about their futures, challenged expectations in subtle ways, followed trends in clothing and hairstyles, admired celebrities of their time, dreamed of romance, and sometimes even rebelled against their parents. They simply did it in ways shaped by the culture and technology of their own era. The idea of Generation Z obviously did not exist. Historians use that label only for people born in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Yet using the phrase as a comparison allows us to ask fascinating questions. What did it mean to be young in medieval China? How did teenagers think? What excited them? What frightened them? And would we recognize ourselves if we met one of them? To answer those questions, we have to travel across centuries of Chinese history through the Tang, Song, Yuan, and Ming dynasties, where millions of young people experienced childhood and adulthood in ways both strange and surprisingly familiar. Life began with family. Unlike many modern societies where independence is often encouraged during adolescence, medieval Chinese society revolved around the family. Every member had responsibilities. Children were expected to respect parents absolutely, and this principle was reinforced by Confucian philosophy, which shaped education, law, and daily behavior for centuries. From the moment a child could walk, lessons began. Respect your father, honor your mother, listen before speaking, never embarrass your family, work hard, study harder. These values were repeated so often that they became part of everyday life, but just because teenagers were taught obedience did not mean they always enjoyed it. Historical stories occasionally describe young people arguing with parents, secretly pursuing romances or avoiding responsibilities. Human nature has always included curiosity and a desire for independence. The biggest difference was that medieval society left very little room for open rebellion. A modern teenager might argue about curfews or career choices. A medieval Chinese teenager could face consequences affecting not only themselves, but the reputation of their entire family. Family honor mattered enormously. This pressure shaped almost every decision young people made. Education was another defining feature. For boys from wealthier families, school represented both opportunity and enormous stress. Their ultimate dream was passing the Imperial civil service examinations. These examinations were among the most difficult academic systems in world history. Success could transform an ordinary family into one respected across the empire. Failure could mean years or even decades of disappointment. Imagine preparing for one examination for most of your youth. Imagine memorizing thousands of classical characters. Imagine writing essays under strict conditions, while knowing your family's future might depend on your performance. Many students devoted nearly every waking hour to study. Some slept only a few hours each night. Some copied classical texts until their hands cramped. Others practiced calligraphy repeatedly, because beautiful handwriting reflected discipline and education. In many ways, these students experienced academic pressure that modern teenagers would immediately recognize. The exams became the medieval equivalent of life-defining entrance tests. Parents worried. Students worried even more. Friendships often developed between classmates facing the same challenges. They shared stories. They encouraged one another. Sometimes they competed fiercely. Competition was everywhere. Every successful candidate reduced someone else's chances, yet friendships survived. Letters exchanged between scholars reveal humor, encouragement, frustration, and dreams that sound remarkably modern, despite being written centuries ago. Not everyone attended school. Most ordinary boys spent their youth learning practical skills instead. Farmers taught sons how to plant rice. Blacksmiths trained apprentices. Merchants introduced children to accounting. Potters demonstrated how clay transformed into beautiful ceramics. Skills passed from one generation to the next. Learning happened through observation and repetition rather than classrooms. Girls experienced a different path. Formal education existed for some wealthy girls, especially those born into elite families. Many learned reading, writing, poetry, music, embroidery, painting, and household management. However, most girls were primarily trained for family responsibilities: cooking, weaving, sewing, managing household finances, caring for younger siblings, preparing for marriage. Yet history contains remarkable women who exceeded society's expectations. Some became respected poets. Others became painters. Some wrote essays admired for centuries. Their achievements remind us that talent often found ways to emerge even within restrictive social systems. Fashion also mattered more than many people imagine. Young people noticed appearance. Different dynasties introduced changing styles. Sleeve lengths shifted. Collar designs evolved. Colors reflected both fashion and social status. Hair became an especially important symbol. Young women spent considerable time arranging elaborate hairstyles decorated with flowers, ribbons, jade ornaments, and delicate hairpins. Young men likewise paid attention to hats, robes, belts, and hairstyles appropriate to their age and status. Fashion trends spread through cities. Merchants sold attractive fabrics imported from distant regions. Silk remained the ultimate luxury. Cotton became increasingly common in later centuries. Even ordinary families attempted to dress well during festivals. Clothing communicated identity before anyone spoke. Festivals represented the highlight of the year. Imagine growing up in a world without movies or video games. Celebrations became unforgettable moments. The Lantern Festival illuminated entire streets with glowing lanterns. Musicians performed. Acrobats amazed crowds. Storytellers gathered audiences around dramatic tales. Street vendors sold colorful sweets. Children played games. Teenagers wandered through celebrations, hoping to meet friends, or perhaps someone special. These festivals temporarily relaxed the rigid routines of everyday life. Young people laughed more freely. Families traveled together. Communities felt alive. The Mid-Autumn Festival created another cherished tradition. Mooncakes appeared. Families admired the full moon. Poetry was recited. Music drifted through courtyards. For many teenagers, festivals became treasured memories lasting a lifetime. Romance naturally occupied many young minds. Despite arranged marriages being common, emotions rarely followed official rules. Poetry from medieval China frequently captures longing, admiration, separation, and heartbreak. Young scholars wrote verses inspired by women they admired. Young women composed poems expressing hopes and disappointments. Love stories circulated across towns and cities. Some ended happily. Many ended tragically because family expectations outweighed personal desires. The tension between love and duty became one of Chinese literature's greatest themes. Young audiences eagerly embraced these stories because they reflected emotions they understood personally. Music played an equally important role. Although no recordings existed, music surrounded everyday life. Students learned instruments. Families sang together. Professional performers entertained crowds. Court musicians introduced new styles. Regional traditions mixed together through trade. Popular melodies spread surprisingly far despite the lack of modern communication. Young people remembered favorite songs, much like today's listeners remember chart-topping hits. Entertainment extended beyond music. Board games challenged strategic thinking. Chess-like games became popular. Physical sports encouraged teamwork and strength. Archery remained respected. Horse riding impressed spectators. Martial arts training existed in various forms depending on region and social class. Young people constantly searched for opportunities to enjoy themselves despite demanding responsibilities. One misconception about medieval life is that everyone constantly worked without joy. Historical evidence suggests otherwise. People celebrated. They joked. They competed. They fell in love. They laughed. Teenagers, perhaps more than anyone else, found creative ways to make ordinary days exciting. Their world lacked electricity, but not imagination. Their world lacked smartphones, but not friendships. Their world lacked social media, but not social lives. The more we examine medieval China, the clearer one truth becomes. Young people have always been young people. Technology changes. Governments rise and fall. Empires expand and collapse. But curiosity, ambition, friendship, fear, hope, love, and the desire to find one's place in the world remain remarkably constant across history. If you had walked through the busy streets of Hangzhou during the Southern Song Dynasty, you might have been surprised by how young the city felt. Merchants shouted from colorful market stalls. The aroma of freshly cooked dumplings, steamed buns, roasted chestnuts, and sweet rice cakes drifted through the air. Musicians filled public squares with melodies. Storytellers attracted crowds that laughed, gasped, and applauded at every dramatic twist. Among those crowds were teenagers. Some had just finished helping their parents in family businesses. Others were apprentices learning trades. Wealthier students had escaped their books for a few precious hours before returning to another evening of memorizing Confucian classics. If medieval China had places where young people naturally gathered, these markets were among them. Unlike the quiet image many people imagine, Chinese cities were alive with conversation. News traveled from merchant to merchant. Travelers brought stories from distant provinces. Soldiers returning from military service shared tales of battles on the empire's frontiers. Buddhist monks described distant temples. Foreign traders from Persia, Central Asia, and the Islamic world introduced unfamiliar languages, fashions, and customs. For curious young minds, every market became a classroom. Not everyone could read books, but everyone could listen. This constant exchange of ideas meant that young people were often better informed than we assume. They knew which official had recently earned the emperor's favor. They knew which scholar had passed the highest level of the civil service examination. They knew which merchant had become unexpectedly wealthy and which family had fallen into disgrace. Gossip spread quickly. Centuries before social media, rumors traveled astonishingly fast. One interesting story told by later writers describes how a talented young scholar became famous simply because people admired his poetry. Copies of his work passed from hand to hand. Students memorized his verses. Families discussed his achievements over dinner. Without realizing it, they had created something similar to celebrity culture. Today's influencers gain followers online. Medieval scholars gained admirers through handwritten manuscripts and public reputation. Success depended on talent, personality, and word of mouth. Reputation was everything. That reputation extended to appearance as well. Although strict social rules controlled clothing, young people still searched for ways to express themselves. Different fabrics suggested different levels of wealth. A beautifully embroidered sleeve might quietly signal that someone belonged to an influential family. Hair ornaments could reveal age, marital status, or regional identity. Even the way someone tied a belt could communicate subtle messages understood by people around them. Fashion evolved continuously. Each dynasty developed preferences that younger generations eagerly adopted. Older people occasionally complained that today's youth cared too much about appearances. If that sounds familiar, it should. Complaints about younger generations are far older than most people realize. Chinese writers occasionally criticized fashionable young men for spending too much time grooming themselves. Others joked about wealthy families whose daughters competed to wear the newest styles. Every generation believed the next generation was changing too quickly. Some things never change. Friendships formed another essential part of teenage life. Most friendships developed naturally through shared responsibilities. Students, studying together, spent years helping one another prepare for examinations. Farmers' children worked together during planting and harvest seasons. Apprentices learned alongside others in workshops. Neighbors played together during festivals. These friendships often lasted decades. Letters exchanged between friends reveal remarkable emotional depth. Young scholars encouraged one another after examination failures. They celebrated success together. They shared poems expressing homesickness while traveling. Some friendships became so strong that they referred to one another as brothers despite having no blood relationship. Trust mattered deeply. Loyalty mattered even more. Breaking a friend's confidence could permanently damage one's reputation. Honor wasn't simply an abstract idea taught in books. It influenced daily relationships. Entertainment continued evolving throughout medieval China. Professional storytellers became celebrities within their communities. People gathered in tea houses simply to hear the next chapter of a famous adventure. Imagine waiting an entire week to discover what happened next in your favorite story. There were no instant downloads, no streaming services. Patience became part of the entertainment. The anticipation made every performance feel special. Young listeners repeated these stories afterward, sometimes exaggerating details until legends grew even larger. Heroes became larger than life. Generals performed impossible feats. Monks defeated demons. Brilliant detectives solved impossible mysteries. Historical figures blended with myth until separating fact from fiction became difficult. Teenagers loved these stories because they offered excitement beyond ordinary daily routines. Many dreamed of becoming legendary themselves. Some imagined serving the emperor. Others dreamed of becoming famous poets. Some wanted wealth. Others wanted adventure. Dreams rarely respected social boundaries. Reality, however, remained demanding. For ordinary farming families, work never truly ended. Children learned responsibility from remarkably young ages. A 10-year-old might already understand seasonal farming cycles. By 13 or 14, many carried responsibilities modern adults would find exhausting. Rice fields required constant attention. Irrigation systems needed maintenance. Animals demanded care. Weather could destroy months of hard work overnight. Young people learned resilience because survival depended upon it. Failure wasn't merely disappointing. Sometimes it threatened the family's ability to eat during winter. This responsibility matured teenagers quickly. Yet even after long days of labor, they still found opportunities for fun. Simple games became treasured moments. Children competed in races through village paths. Teenagers challenged one another in contests requiring balance, strength, or cleverness. Festivals transformed villages into places filled with laughter. Music echoed late into the evening. Lanterns illuminated streets. Families forgot their worries, at least for one night. One fascinating aspect of medieval youth culture involved poetry. Today, many teenagers communicate through text messages or short videos. Young, educated Chinese often communicated through poetry. A single poem could express admiration, disappointment, homesickness, ambition, humor, or quiet rebellion. Poetry wasn't considered strange or unusual. It was part of everyday educated life. Friends exchanged poems instead of greeting cards. Students wrote poems after traveling. Young lovers hid emotions inside carefully chosen verses. Even officials sometimes composed poetry during difficult moments. Words carried enormous power. A beautifully written poem could preserve someone's reputation for centuries. An embarrassing piece could become equally unforgettable. Calligraphy added another layer. Beautiful handwriting wasn't simply neat writing. It reflected character. Teachers believed disciplined brushstrokes revealed disciplined thinking. Students, therefore, practiced endlessly. Hours passed as brush met paper again and again. At first glance, this seems repetitive, but many students described calligraphy as calming. It demanded concentration, patience, precision, qualities highly valued throughout Chinese society. Not every teenager appreciated these expectations. Some secretly preferred excitement over scholarship. Historical novels often feature adventurous young heroes who skip lessons to explore mountains, investigate mysteries, or challenge corrupt officials. Although fictional, these stories reflected a timeless fantasy. Many young people imagined escaping ordinary responsibilities in search of extraordinary lives. Parents rarely shared that enthusiasm. Family expectations remained powerful. Marriage represented one of the biggest turning points. Unlike today, many marriages were arranged with careful consideration of family background, education, finances, and reputation. Teenagers often had limited influence over these decisions. Some accepted them peacefully, others struggled emotionally. Ancient letters and poems reveal sadness, uncertainty, hope, and determination surrounding marriage. Love existed, duty existed too. Sometimes they aligned, often they did not. This conflict inspired countless stories that remained popular for generations. As medieval China continued changing through different dynasties, young people adapted again and again. New technologies appeared. Printing spread knowledge more widely. Cities expanded. Trade connected distant cultures. Foreign ideas entered China while Chinese inventions transformed neighboring civilizations. Young people frequently embrace change faster than older generations. That pattern has repeated throughout human history. Every generation inherits an old world, then quietly begins creating a new one. The teenagers of medieval China never imagined smartphones, airplanes, or the internet. Yet they experienced curiosity, friendship, ambition, anxiety, romance, fashion, dreams, and the desire to build meaningful lives. In that sense, they were far closer to today's Generation Z than the centuries between them might suggest. One of the biggest myths about medieval China is that young people had no personal identity. It is easy to imagine millions of teenagers living identical lives, wearing identical clothes, following identical routines, and thinking identical thoughts. History tells a far more interesting story. Every generation grows up in a different world. A teenager born during the peaceful years of the Tang Dynasty experienced a very different childhood from someone growing up during the political uncertainty of the late Yuan Dynasty. Wars, economic prosperity, natural disasters, technological advances, and changing governments all shaped how young people viewed the future. For some, life seemed full of opportunity. For others, survival itself became the greatest ambition. Even so, young people continued searching for happiness wherever they could find it. Morning usually began before sunrise. The streets were still quiet as smoke rose from kitchen fires. Families prepared simple breakfasts consisting of rice, porridge, vegetables, or steamed buns, depending on the region and the family's wealth. There was rarely time to waste. A farmer's son walked toward the fields, carrying tools nearly as tall as himself. An apprentice hurried to his master's workshop. A student picked up his brushes and carefully protected his precious books from rain and dust. A merchant's daughter helped organize goods before customers arrived. Each teenager belonged to a different world, yet every one of them understood responsibility. Unlike modern education, learning rarely ended when lessons finished. Parents continued teaching throughout the day. Grandparents corrected manners. Older siblings demonstrated practical skills. Knowledge passed naturally from one generation to another. Respect for elders was not simply encouraged. It formed one of the foundations of society. This respect, however, did not prevent disagreements. teenagers still questioned decisions privately. They still wished for greater freedom. Sometimes they complained to trusted friends. Sometimes they expressed frustration through poetry rather than direct confrontation. Indirect communication became an art. Instead of openly criticizing someone, educated young people often use stories, historical examples, or symbolic language to express their opinions. A poem describing autumn leaves might secretly represent disappointment. A mountain could symbolize determination. Flowing water could represent freedom. The deeper someone understood literature, the more hidden meanings they could discover. This made conversations surprisingly sophisticated. It also allowed young people to express emotions while avoiding direct conflict. Books played a fascinating role in shaping youth culture. Printing technology expanded dramatically during the Song Dynasty. For the first time in history, books became more accessible than ever before. They were still valuable, but they no longer existed only inside imperial libraries or wealthy households. Students eagerly collected educational texts. Story lovers searched for entertaining novels. Poetry collections became treasured possessions. Families often read together during quiet evenings. For many teenagers, books opened windows into worlds they would never physically visit. They learned about distant provinces, ancient heroes, legendary battles, famous philosophers, foreign kingdoms beyond China's borders. Knowledge expanded imagination. Imagination inspired ambition. Some dreamed of becoming scholars whose writings would survive for centuries. Others imagined commanding armies or serving as honest government officials who protected ordinary people from corruption. Stories mattered because they offered examples worth following. Not every hero carried a sword. Some carried only a brush. Education continued to dominate the lives of ambitious young men. The imperial examination system rewarded extraordinary memory, discipline, and intellectual ability. Months became years. Years became decades. Some candidates spent half their lives preparing. Failure often came repeatedly. A student might pass the local examination but fail at the provincial level. He could return home, study for another 3 years, and fail again. Some persisted into middle age before finally succeeding. Others never achieved their dream. Imagine carrying that pressure from your teenage years onward. The emotional burden was immense. Letters written by unsuccessful candidates revealed disappointment that feels surprisingly modern. They worried about letting down parents. They feared falling behind classmates. They questioned whether hard work would ever be rewarded. These concerns could easily belong to students preparing for major university entrance exams today. Success brought enormous celebration. Entire villages honored successful scholars. Families organized banquets. Neighbors offered congratulations. Children admired them. Younger students hoped to follow their example. For one remarkable moment, years of sacrifice suddenly seemed worthwhile. Fame did not belong only to scholars. Talented artists attracted admiration as well. Painters developed distinctive styles. Musicians became widely respected. Actors entertained crowded audiences. Master craftsmen earned reputations that spread across provinces. Young apprentices often dreamed of becoming masters whose work everyone recognized. Recognition mattered. People wanted their talents appreciated. That desire has never disappeared from human nature. Cities became centers of youthful energy. The larger the city, the greater the opportunities. Markets offered imported goods from across Asia. Tea houses hosted intellectual discussions. Restaurants introduced new regional dishes. Bookshops displayed freshly printed works. Entertainment districts welcomed performers every evening. Teenagers arriving from rural villages often felt overwhelmed. Everything moved faster. Everything seemed larger. Everything appeared more exciting. Cities exposed young people to ideas unavailable in isolated communities. Fashion evolved more rapidly. New hairstyles appeared. Fresh musical styles spread. Different dialects mixed together. Cultural exchange became part of everyday life. Foreign visitors also attracted attention. Merchants from Persia, travelers from Central Asia, envoys from neighboring kingdoms, religious teachers carrying unfamiliar beliefs. For curious teenagers, these visitors represented living windows into distant civilizations. Questions flowed endlessly. What did other countries look like? How did foreigners dress? What languages did they speak? What foods did they eat? Curiosity pushed young minds beyond the borders of their own world. Tea houses deserve special attention because they functioned almost like community gathering places. People came not only to drink tea, they exchanged news, played board games, listened to storytellers, debated philosophy, discussed politics carefully, shared business opportunities. For educated youth especially, tea houses became places where ideas circulated freely. Friendships strengthened there. Mentors met promising students. Poets found inspiration. The atmosphere encouraged conversation. Some historians even compare these gatherings to the coffeehouse culture that later flourished in Europe. While teenagers enjoyed social life, danger remained a constant reality. Disease spread without modern medicine. Floods destroyed harvests. Fires consumed crowded neighborhoods. Bandits threatened travelers. Political unrest occasionally transformed peaceful communities into battlefields. Growing up meant accepting uncertainty. No one could assume tomorrow would resemble today. This uncertainty encouraged resilience. People celebrated ordinary moments because life itself could change unexpectedly. Perhaps this explains why festivals felt so joyful. They reminded communities that happiness deserved to be shared while it lasted. Young people danced. Musicians performed. Families reunited. Lanterns illuminated the darkness. For a few precious nights, worries faded into the background. Many lifelong memories were created during these celebrations. The transition into adulthood came earlier than it does today. By the late teenage years, many young people had already accepted adult responsibilities. Some managed businesses. Others worked full-time in family trades. Many married. Some even became parents before reaching what modern society considers adulthood. Childhood ended quickly, yet youth itself never disappeared. Even adults enjoyed jokes, competitions, music, romance, and friendship. Growing older meant gaining responsibility, not abandoning joy. As medieval China continued evolving through changing dynasties, one constant remained remarkably clear. Every new generation believed the future could be different from the past. Some pursued education, some pursued wealth, some pursued adventure, some pursued love. Their methods differed from today's Generation Z, but their hopes were surprisingly familiar. Across the centuries, young people continued asking the same timeless question that echoes through every civilization. Who am I, and what kind of life do I want to build? By the time a teenager reached the age of 15 or 16 in medieval China, the world expected maturity. Childhood games gradually gave way to adult responsibilities, but that did not mean youthful curiosity disappeared. In many ways, it became even stronger. Young people wanted to know what lay beyond the mountains surrounding their villages. They wondered what life was like inside the emperor's magnificent capital. They imagined distant deserts where caravans crossed the Silk Road. They dreamed about great rivers carrying enormous ships filled with silk, porcelain, spices, and treasures from lands they would probably never see. For most teenagers, travel remained a dream. Leaving one's hometown was uncommon unless work, military service, education, or marriage made it necessary. This made every traveler an important source of information. When merchants arrived from distant provinces, local youths gathered to listen. The travelers described enormous cities with crowded streets stretching farther than the eye could see. They spoke about markets filled with goods from Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, India, Persia, and beyond. They described towering pagodas, magnificent temples, colorful festivals, and famous scholars whose names were known across the empire. Each story expanded the imagination of young listeners. Even if they never traveled themselves, their minds journeyed through these stories. This hunger for knowledge helped shape one of the most educated civilizations of the medieval world. Curiosity was respected. Learning was admired. Intelligence could change a person's destiny. That belief encouraged countless young people to dedicate themselves to study despite overwhelming difficulties. Yet not every teenager dreamed of becoming a scholar. Some preferred action over books. Military life attracted ambitious young men seeking honor and opportunity. China's borders constantly required protection. Armies defended mountain passes, deserts, rivers, and long frontier regions against invading forces. Joining the military offered adventure, but also enormous danger. Training demanded discipline. Archery became essential. Swordsmanship required years of practice. Horse riding demanded exceptional balance and courage. Physical endurance determined survival. Young recruits quickly discovered that stories celebrating glorious victories rarely mentioned exhaustion, hunger, freezing winters, or the fear felt before battle. Reality proved far harsher than legends. Even so, military heroes inspired admiration throughout society. Children imitated famous generals during games. Storytellers exaggerated their achievements. Poets praised bravery and sacrifice. Teenagers dreamed of earning similar respect. Honor remained one of the strongest motivations. Meanwhile, life for young women followed different expectations, though their experiences were no less complex. Girls often learned sophisticated household management from an early age. Running a household required remarkable organizational skills. Food supplies had to last through changing seasons. Clothing required constant repair. Guests needed proper hospitality. Family finances demanded careful planning. Ceremonies followed precise traditions. These responsibilities required intelligence, patience, and leadership. Elite families frequently ensured daughters received education in literature, music, painting, calligraphy, and poetry. A well-educated young woman brought prestige to her family. Some became extraordinary writers, whose works still survive centuries later. Their poetry reveals emotions that remain deeply relatable. They wrote about loneliness, friendship, changing seasons, family separation, dreams left unfulfilled, moments of quiet happiness. Reading these poems today reminds us that emotional experiences connect people across history. Love, uncertainty, hope, and disappointment remain timeless. Music accompanied nearly every important moment in life. Festivals echoed with drums, flutes, bells, and stringed instruments. Court musicians performed elegant compositions. Village celebrations featured lively folk songs. Students practiced traditional melodies as part of their education. Music served entertainment, ceremony, education, and emotional expression all at once. Teenagers naturally developed favorite performers and favorite songs. Without recordings, music spread through memory. A traveler learned a melody in one province. Months later, he performed it elsewhere. Gradually, the tune became known across regions. Cultural trends traveled surprisingly effectively despite the absence of modern technology. Food also reflected youth culture more than many people imagine. Young people enjoyed treats just as children do today. Street vendors sold steamed buns filled with meat or vegetables. Sweet pastries attracted eager customers. Candied fruits sparkled in market stalls. Fresh noodles were prepared before customers' eyes. Regional specialties created excitement whenever travelers introduced unfamiliar flavors. Festivals became opportunities to enjoy foods unavailable during ordinary days. Families saved money for celebrations because special meals strengthened family bonds. Eating together carried deep cultural meaning. Conversations unfolded over shared dishes. Advice passed naturally from older generations to younger ones. Stories entertained children while adults reflected upon history and tradition. Meals became classrooms without walls. Respect for ancestors influenced every generation. Many young people participated in ceremonies honoring relatives who had passed away. These traditions reminded teenagers that they belonged to a long family history extending far beyond their own lifetime. Their actions reflected not only upon themselves, but upon generations before them and those yet to come. This sense of continuity shaped personal identity in powerful ways. Modern teenagers often ask what kind of future they want. Medieval Chinese teenagers asked that question too. The difference was that their answers almost always included family responsibilities. Individual success mattered. Family success mattered even more. One fascinating aspect of youth culture involved humor. History sometimes portrays medieval societies as endlessly serious. Reality was far more colorful. People loved jokes, funny stories circulated widely. Playful riddles challenged clever minds. Comic actors entertained audiences. Friends teased one another. Students occasionally played harmless pranks, despite strict educational environments. Humor relieved stress created by demanding expectations. Laughter reminded communities that even difficult lives contained moments of joy. Animals also occupied important places in daily life. Dogs guarded homes. Cats protected grain from rats. Oxen worked fields. Horses symbolized status and military strength. Birds appeared in poetry as symbols of freedom, longing, or changing seasons. Young people developed close relationships with animals, just as many do today. Nature surrounded nearly every aspect of medieval life. Unlike modern cities dominated by concrete and glass, most young people grew up closely connected to changing seasons. Spring brought planting, summer demanded hard work, Autumn rewarded effort with harvest. Winter encouraged storytelling, study, and family gatherings indoors. Teenagers learned to observe weather carefully because survival depended upon understanding nature. A delayed rainfall affected harvests. An early frost threatened crops. A flood changed entire communities. Nature became both teacher and challenge. Poetry reflected this relationship beautifully. A blooming plum blossom represented perseverance. Flowing rivers symbolized time. Mountains suggested strength and stability. Falling leaves reminded people that change was inevitable. Young poets learned these symbols early, allowing them to express complex emotions through simple images. As teenagers matured, they slowly realized that adulthood rarely resembled childhood dreams. Some achieved success, others faced disappointment, some traveled. Many remained in their hometowns forever. Some married happily. Others accepted relationships chosen by their families. Life unfolded unpredictably. Yet one quality consistently distinguished medieval Chinese youth. They adapted every political change, every technological advance, every economic challenge, every cultural shift required adjustment. Generation after generation found new ways to balance tradition with changing realities. Perhaps that is the greatest similarity between medieval youth and today's Generation Z. Both inherited worlds they did not create. Both faced uncertainty about the future. Both searched for identity while navigating expectations placed upon them. Both questioned old ideas while respecting valuable traditions. And both discovered that growing up has never been simple, regardless of the century in which it happens. The world around medieval Chinese teenagers looked dramatically different from our own, yet the emotions within their hearts remain surprisingly recognizable. The deeper we explore their lives, the more we discover that history is not merely about emperors, wars, and dynasties. It is also the story of ordinary young people trying to understand themselves, find happiness, earn respect, build friendships, and imagine a better future. Those quiet, personal stories are often the ones that survive the longest. As teenagers grew older in medieval China, one question slowly became impossible to ignore. What kind of adult would they become? Unlike today, there were very few years between childhood and adulthood. Society expected young people to mature quickly. By their mid-teens, many were already carrying responsibilities that modern people often associate with adulthood. Yet inside they were still discovering who they were. This quiet struggle between expectation and personal identity shaped countless lives. A young scholar might secretly dream of becoming a poet instead of an official. A merchant's son might wish to travel instead of managing the family business. A farmer's daughter could possess extraordinary artistic talent that few people outside her village would ever see. History usually remembers emperors and generals. But millions of ordinary young people lived with dreams that were never recorded. Even so, fragments of their lives remain hidden inside letters, poems, family records, and official documents. One remarkable feature of medieval Chinese society was its deep respect for learning. Knowledge was more than information. It represented character. Parents believed education taught patience. Teachers believed it built discipline. Officials believed it produced honest government. Students believed it offered hope. Books, therefore, became precious companions. Many families owned only a handful of texts. They were carefully protected from moisture, insects, and fire. Children learned to handle them with extraordinary care. Turning each page required respect. A damaged book represented a serious loss. For students, copying texts by hand became an important exercise. Hours disappeared as brushes moved steadily across paper. This practice strengthened memory while improving handwriting. Mistakes required starting again. Patience became as valuable as intelligence. Modern students often complain about homework. Medieval students certainly would have understood that feeling. The pressure could become overwhelming. Some candidates spent years preparing for examinations without success. Every failed attempt tested confidence. Every passing year increased family expectations. Some eventually questioned whether their sacrifices had been worthwhile. Yet many continued because hope remained stronger than disappointment. Hope has always been one of humanity's greatest sources of strength. Outside the classroom, life continued with equal intensity. Markets remained crowded with activity. Craftsmen shaped wood into furniture of remarkable beauty. Blacksmiths forged farming tools and elegant weapons. Potters created delicate porcelain admired throughout the world. Silk weavers produced fabrics so fine that foreign merchants traveled thousands of miles to purchase them. Young apprentices observed every movement. A master rarely explained everything immediately. Learning required careful observation. Small details separated ordinary work from true craftsmanship. Years passed before an apprentice earned complete trust. Patience defined every profession. Mistakes were expected. Repeated mistakes were not. This system produced remarkable skill because experience accumulated slowly over decades. Friendships often developed inside these workshops. Apprentices worked side by side from sunrise until evening. They shared meals, encouraged one another, celebrated progress together. Sometimes they competed. Healthy competition pushed everyone to improve. Occasionally, jealousy appeared as well. Human emotions have changed very little across history. Competition inspired excellence, but also created tension. Managing both became part of growing up. Entertainment remained essential, despite demanding schedules. Storytellers continued attracting audiences wherever crowds gathered. Their voices rose dramatically as heroes confronted impossible dangers. Children leaned forward with excitement. Teenagers silently imagined themselves inside the story. Adults smiled while pretending that they had heard the tale countless times before. A skilled storyteller could hold hundreds of listeners completely silent. Words alone created entire worlds. This tradition helped preserve history while encouraging imagination. Opera gradually became another popular form of entertainment. Performers combined music, dance, elaborate costumes, and dramatic storytelling into unforgettable performances. Each movement carried meaning. Each costume color represented different personality traits. Audiences quickly recognized heroes, villains, wise officials, or foolish characters simply by appearance. Young people admired talented performers. Some even dreamed of joining theatrical groups, despite society occasionally viewing actors with mixed opinions. Art inspired ambition regardless of social expectations. Festivals remained the brightest moments of the year. The Lantern Festival transformed entire cities into glowing landscapes. Thousands of lanterns floated above crowded streets. Some displayed animals. Others represented legendary heroes. Many contained riddles challenging visitors to solve clever puzzles. Teenagers eagerly tested themselves. Winning admiration through intelligence felt just as satisfying as winning physical competitions. Families walked together beneath endless lights. Music echoed from every direction. Laughter filled the evening air. For a short time, everyday worries disappeared. The Mid-Autumn Festival offered a different atmosphere. Instead of bustling streets, families gathered quietly beneath the full moon. Poetry became especially important. People reflected upon relatives living far away. Students studying in distant cities missed their parents. Merchants traveling for business longed for home. The same moon shone above everyone. That simple idea inspired countless poems expressing homesickness and hope. Young people understood these emotions deeply. Many experienced separation for the first time while pursuing education or apprenticeships. Distance strengthened appreciation for family. Travel itself remained an extraordinary experience. Roads connected much of the empire, but journeys demanded courage. Travelers faced unpredictable weather. Flooded rivers delayed progress. Mountain paths challenged even experienced guides. Bandits occasionally threatened isolated routes. Yet curiosity continued pulling people forward. Young merchants explored unfamiliar markets. Students traveled toward examination centers. Officials accepted appointments in distant provinces. Monks journeyed between temples seeking knowledge. Every journey transformed the traveler. Meeting different people expanded understanding of the world. New foods, new accents, new customs, new ideas. Travel taught lessons impossible to learn from books alone. Young people who returned home after years away often viewed familiar places differently. Experience changed perspective. Religion also influenced youth culture. Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucian philosophy shaped daily life in different ways. Many families visited temples during festivals. Young people observed ceremonies, lit incense, prayed for health, success, or family happiness. Monks sometimes taught moral lessons through fascinating stories rather than lengthy lectures. These stories remained memorable because they connected wisdom with adventure. Many teenagers found comfort in religious traditions during uncertain times. Life, after all, offered no guarantees. Disease could appear unexpectedly. Natural disasters could destroy entire communities. Political changes sometimes altered ordinary lives overnight. Faith offered stability when circumstances became unpredictable. One fascinating aspect of medieval Chinese youth was their relationship with nature. Modern teenagers often spend much of their time indoors. Most medieval teenagers lived almost entirely outdoors. They understood birdsong, recognized changing winds, watched rivers rise after heavy rain, observed stars guiding travelers during clear nights. Nature became part of everyday awareness. This close relationship influenced literature profoundly. A single flower could symbolize hope. Morning mist suggested uncertainty. A soaring crane represented freedom. Young poets learned these meanings naturally because they lived among the landscapes they described. As years passed, every teenager eventually realized an important truth. No matter how carefully life was planned, unexpected events always appeared. Some opportunities arrived without warning. Some hardships could not be avoided. Success required adaptability as much as talent. Perhaps this explains why medieval Chinese civilization survived so many centuries of political change. Each new generation inherited traditions while quietly reshaping them for a changing world. Young people respected the past, but they also created the future. That balance between tradition and innovation became one of the defining characteristics of Chinese civilization. As young people entered adulthood in medieval China, another reality slowly became clear. The world rewarded patience, far more often than speed. Today, many people expect instant results. Messages arrive in seconds. Information travels across the globe almost immediately. Success stories often seem to appear overnight. Medieval China operated according to a completely different rhythm. A tree planted today might not provide meaningful shade for years. An apprentice could spend a decade mastering a single craft. A scholar might dedicate 20 years to passing the Imperial examinations. A merchant slowly built trust through countless honest transactions. Everything valuable required time. Teenagers learned this lesson earlier than most modern young people. Every season reminded them that nature could never be rushed. Rice did not grow faster because someone wished it would. Silkworms followed their own cycle. Fruit ripened only when the weather allowed. Life itself encouraged patience. Yet patience did not mean a lack of ambition. Quite the opposite. Young people dreamed constantly. Some dreamed of entering the emperor's court. Others imagined becoming famous painters whose works would hang inside wealthy homes. Some wanted to build successful trading companies. Others wished simply to provide a comfortable life for their parents. Success looked different depending on one's circumstances. For many families, true success meant stability rather than fame, a reliable harvest, healthy children, a peaceful home, enough food stored for winter. Those simple achievements represented enormous victories. Teenagers understood this because they watched their parents work tirelessly every day. Respect often grew naturally from observation. One fascinating part of medieval youth culture involved storytelling within families. When evening arrived and work finally ended, several generations frequently gathered together. Grandparents remembered events that younger people had never witnessed. They described floods that had changed entire landscapes. They recalled famines that tested entire villages. They spoke about emperors whose policies transformed daily life. Some stories were completely true. Others became slightly exaggerated with each retelling. That hardly mattered. The purpose was not merely entertainment. Stories preserved experience. Every generation inherited wisdom gathered by the previous one. A clever teenager listened carefully. One day those stories would become useful. Education extended beyond books in countless ways. Observation became one of the greatest teachers. A future carpenter watched how different woods behaved. A future physician observed experienced healers preparing herbal medicines. Young merchants studied customers. Students listened carefully to respected teachers, noticing not only what they taught but how they spoke. Learning happened constantly. Curiosity became an advantage. Those who asked thoughtful questions often progressed faster than those who remained silent. Tea culture also shaped everyday life. Tea houses welcomed travelers, scholars, merchants, officials, and ordinary workers. A teenager entering one of these places could overhear conversations about politics, poetry, trade, philosophy, agriculture, or distant lands. Ideas moved from table to table almost effortlessly. Someone returning from the northern frontier described military campaigns. Another discussed new printing techniques. A merchant shared news about changing prices in distant provinces. Young listeners absorbed these conversations eagerly. Without realizing it, they participated in one of history's greatest networks of information exchange. News did not travel electronically. It traveled through people. One conversation could influence dozens more. In that sense, tea houses became something like the social networks of their age. Of course, information was not always accurate. Rumors spread just as easily as facts. Stories grew larger every time someone repeated them. A minor disagreement could become a dramatic scandal after passing through enough conversations. Teenagers quickly learned an important lesson. Not everything they heard deserved to be believed. Wise people verified information before repeating it. That advice remains surprisingly relevant today. Young people also enjoyed testing themselves. Archery competitions attracted enthusiastic participants. Board games rewarded careful planning rather than luck. Poetry contests challenged creativity. Calligraphy competitions measured precision and elegance. Each activity reflected qualities admired by society: discipline, patience, strategy, creativity, self-control. Winning brought admiration. Losing provided motivation to improve. Failure carried valuable lessons. Many respected scholars experienced repeated failures before achieving lasting success. Perseverance became part of their identity. Failure, therefore, did not automatically define someone's future. It simply revealed another obstacle. The relationship between young people and authority remained complex. Confucian values emphasized obedience. Parents deserved respect. Teachers deserved respect. Officials deserved respect. The emperor represented the highest authority of all. Yet respect did not eliminate independent thinking. Many great Chinese philosophers encouraged careful reflection. Students were expected to understand ideas deeply rather than merely repeat them. An educated person developed judgment. Knowing when to speak required wisdom. Knowing when to remain silent required equal wisdom. Some of history's greatest officials quietly criticized corruption while remaining loyal to the state. This delicate balance demanded extraordinary intelligence. Teenagers admired such figures because they demonstrated courage without recklessness. Women also found subtle ways to express individuality despite social limitations. Their poetry often contained deeply personal reflections. Their embroidery revealed remarkable artistic creativity. Paintings displayed refined understanding of beauty and nature. Within accepted traditions, talented women created lasting cultural contributions. Many modern readers are surprised by how sophisticated their writings remain. The emotions feel immediate, the observations feel timeless. Across centuries, the human heart has changed very little. Nature continued influencing nearly every aspect of life. Spring represented beginnings. Summer demanded effort. Autumn rewarded labor. Winter encouraged reflection. Young people planned their activities according to these natural rhythms. Festivals celebrated seasonal transitions. Poets described changing landscapes. Farmers observed weather carefully. Even city residents remained closely connected to agricultural cycles because food supplies depended upon successful harvests. This awareness created deep appreciation for balance. Too much rain caused flooding. Too little rain brought drought. Moderation became one of life's guiding principles. Chinese philosophy reflected that understanding. Balance appeared everywhere. In family relationships, government, art, medicine, education, daily habits. Young people absorbed these ideas gradually through experience rather than formal lectures alone. As they matured, they realized that wisdom rarely came from dramatic moments. More often, it developed through thousands of ordinary days. Helping parents, practicing handwriting, learning a trade, supporting friends, accepting disappointment, celebrating success, growing a little stronger with each passing year. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson medieval Chinese youth can still teach us. History is not only shaped by extraordinary heroes, it is also shaped by millions of ordinary young people who quietly work, learn, love, adapt, and dream. Their names may never appear in history books, but together they built one of the world's greatest civilizations. As medieval Chinese teenagers grew older, one invisible force followed them everywhere. It could not be touched, it could not be bought, yet it often determined whether doors opened or remained forever closed. That force was reputation. Today, people often build reputations through online profiles, photographs, videos, or social media. In medieval China, reputation spread almost entirely through human memory and conversation. A teacher recommended a hardworking student. A merchant praised an honest apprentice. A neighbor admired a respectful son. A traveler spoke highly of an unusually talented poet. Little by little, a person's name became associated with certain qualities: honesty, kindness, discipline, generosity, or perhaps arrogance, laziness, dishonesty, cruelty. Once established, reputation became surprisingly difficult to change. Teenagers understood this from an early age. Parents frequently reminded them that every action reflected upon the entire family. One careless decision could damage years of careful effort. Although this pressure sometimes felt overwhelming, it also encouraged responsibility. Young people learned that character mattered even when no one seemed to be watching. Friendship became one of the few places where they could relax. Among trusted companions, formal rules softened. Students laughed together after long hours of study. Apprentices shared meals during brief breaks from work. Village teenagers organized games whenever responsibility allowed. Friends exchanged poems, challenged one another with riddles, and discussed dreams that they rarely shared with adults. These conversations created strong emotional bonds. Many lifelong friendships began during adolescence. Some remained close despite living hundreds of miles apart later in life. Letters became precious connections. A carefully written letter could travel for weeks before reaching its destination. Every sentence mattered. Every word had been chosen thoughtfully. Unlike today's quick messages, correspondence demanded patience. Receiving a letter from an old friend became an unforgettable event. Many people read such letters repeatedly. Some carefully stored them for years. Others copied favorite passages into personal notebooks. Words carried lasting emotional value. Young scholars often viewed famous poets almost like modern celebrities. They memorized their verses, discussed their ideas, tried to imitate their writing styles. Some traveled great distances hoping simply to meet a respected teacher or admired writer. Learning directly from someone famous represented an extraordinary opportunity. The influence of role models shaped countless careers. The same was true in craftsmanship. A legendary swordsmith inspired young blacksmiths. An accomplished painter inspired future artists. Master architects influenced ambitious builders. Success created admiration. Admiration inspired imitation. Imitation gradually produced innovation. Every generation learned from the previous one before adding something new. This process kept Chinese civilization constantly evolving. Markets remained exciting places for curious teenagers. Walking through a large city market meant encountering astonishing variety. Fresh vegetables, rare spices, beautiful porcelain, silk from distant workshops, paper fans decorated with elegant paintings, books copied using advanced printing methods, musical instruments, paintbrushes, jewelry, medicinal herbs, exotic goods brought by foreign traders. Every stall revealed another glimpse of a wider world. Young people naturally paused to observe everything. Even those without money enjoyed looking. Curiosity cost nothing. Street performers attracted equally enthusiastic crowds. Acrobats balanced high above the ground. Magicians amazed audiences with clever illusions. Musicians gathered listeners simply by beginning a familiar melody. Puppet shows entertained children while adults secretly enjoyed them just as much. These performers depended entirely upon talent. If audiences lost interest, they earned nothing. If performances impressed the crowd, people returned again and again. Skill created opportunity. This lesson extended far beyond entertainment. One aspect of medieval Chinese youth rarely discussed today is volunteer responsibility within families. Older siblings frequently cared for younger brothers and sisters. Teenagers supervised household chores. They assisted elderly grandparents. Helping relatives was not considered unusual. It simply formed part of everyday life. Responsibility developed naturally through practice rather than formal instruction. Marriage slowly approached as young people reached adulthood. For many teenagers, excitement mixed with uncertainty. Some had already heard stories of happy marriages. Others knew couples who struggled. Marriage represented not merely romance, but cooperation between families. Young couples often carried enormous expectations. They hoped to honor parents, raise children successfully, maintain family traditions, build financial stability. Personal happiness mattered, but family harmony remained equally important. This balance shaped countless relationships. Education never truly ended. Even after examinations, learning continued throughout life. Officials studied history. Merchants improved accounting skills. Artists refined techniques. Physicians expanded medical knowledge. Curiosity remained valuable regardless of age. Those who stopped learning often fell behind. This respect for lifelong education became one of China's greatest cultural strengths. Young people noticed successful adults continuing to read, practice, and improve. Learning, therefore, became a permanent habit rather than a temporary obligation. Another remarkable feature of youth culture involved observing nature. Teenagers spent far more time outdoors than most people today. They recognized seasonal flowers almost instinctively. They noticed birds returning during spring. They understood how changing winds signaled approaching weather. The moon served not only as beautiful scenery, but also as a calendar guiding festivals and agricultural activities. Nature became deeply woven into daily awareness. This close relationship influenced imagination. A student preparing for examinations might compare determination to a pine tree surviving harsh winter. A young woman separated from family could describe migrating birds carrying messages across great distances. A traveler watching a river might reflect upon the unstoppable passage of time. Nature provided endless symbols for human experience. This symbolic language enriched conversations, poetry, and personal reflection. Despite all these cultural achievements, medieval life remained unpredictable. Floods occasionally destroyed entire harvests. Earthquakes damaged cities. Disease spread rapidly. Political struggles altered government policies. Foreign invasions created uncertainty along frontiers. Young people learned resilience because circumstances often changed without warning. Flexibility became an essential survival skill. Those who adapted usually recovered faster than those who resisted every change. This adaptability closely resembles one of Generation Z's defining characteristics today. Modern young people grow up during rapid technological change. Medieval Chinese youth experienced changing dynasties, expanding trade networks, evolving cities, and new inventions transforming everyday life. Their challenges differed. Their adaptability was remarkably similar. Perhaps the greatest misunderstanding about medieval teenagers is the belief that they simply obeyed tradition without question. The truth was more complicated. Most respected tradition deeply. Yet every generation interpreted those traditions slightly differently. New fashions appeared. New literary styles emerged. Fresh artistic techniques developed. Economic opportunities changed. Cities expanded. Ideas traveled farther than ever before. Young people quietly participated in every one of these transformations. They rarely announced themselves as revolutionaries. Instead, they changed society gradually through everyday choices, choosing a different style of poetry, experimenting with artistic techniques, developing new business methods, introducing unfamiliar foods, sharing ideas learned from travelers. Small changes accumulated across generations until entire civilizations evolved. That quiet process may not appear dramatic at first glance, yet history itself often moves exactly that way. Not through one enormous event, but through millions of ordinary people making countless small decisions every single day. And among those millions were teenagers whose hopes, fears, ambitions, friendships, and curiosity would shape the future of China in ways they themselves could never have imagined. If there was one quality that truly united young people across every dynasty of medieval China, it was curiosity. Curiosity about distant lands, curiosity about successful people, curiosity about new ideas, curiosity about the future. That curiosity quietly drove Chinese civilization forward for centuries. A teenager standing beside a busy river port could watch enormous cargo ships arrive from distant regions. Workers unloaded silk, tea, ceramics, paper, medicinal herbs, spices, rare woods, metal tools. Every shipment represented a story from somewhere far away. For young minds, these goods were more than merchandise. They were evidence that the world was much larger than the village or city they called home. Many dreamed of seeing those distant places with their own eyes. Only a small number ever would. Printing technology continued transforming society. Books became more available than ever before. Knowledge spread faster than previous generations could have imagined. Teachers gained access to new commentaries. Students compared different interpretations of classical texts. Poetry collections circulated across provinces. Histories preserved lessons from earlier dynasties. The spread of books created something extraordinary. Young people separated by hundreds of miles could read the same stories, admire the same poets, and discuss the same philosophical ideas. In many ways, this created a shared youth culture that stretched across much of the empire. Their conversations differed from ours. Their interests reflected their own era. But they experienced the same excitement of belonging to a generation connected by common knowledge. Teachers played an enormous role in shaping that generation. A respected teacher offered much more than academic instruction. He became a guide, a mentor, sometimes even a lifelong friend. Students remembered inspiring teachers long after formal lessons ended. Many successful officials later credited their achievements not only to personal effort but also to wise teachers who believed in them during difficult years. Encouragement mattered. Young people have always needed someone who recognizes their potential before they recognize it themselves. Parents remained equally influential. Family expectations often felt heavy. Yet those expectations usually grew from hope rather than cruelty. Mothers and fathers wanted children to experience lives better than their own. A farmer hoped his son might become an educated official. A merchant hoped his daughter would marry into a respected family. An artisan hoped future generations would preserve valuable skills. Parents invested years of sacrifice into those hopes. Teenagers occasionally felt burdened by them. Still, they understood the love behind those expectations. One cannot fully understand medieval youth without appreciating the importance of festivals. These celebrations offered temporary freedom from ordinary routines. The Dragon Boat Festival filled rivers with beautifully decorated racing boats. Entire communities gathered along riverbanks, cheering for competitors. The excitement united people of every age. Teenagers shouted encouragement. Children waved brightly colored ribbons. Musicians performed throughout the day. Street vendors sold festival foods, prepared only during special occasions. Competition created unforgettable memories. Victory brought enormous pride. Defeat inspired determination to return stronger the following year. Festivals also created opportunities for young people to meet others beyond their immediate neighborhoods. Friendships formed. Romances quietly began. Ideas spread naturally through conversation. Communities strengthened their shared identity. Without realizing it, festivals served as powerful social networks, connecting countless lives. Food reflected regional diversity. A teenager traveling from northern China to southern China quickly discovered entirely different flavors. Northern regions favored wheat products such as noodles and steamed bread. Southern regions relied heavily upon rice. Every province developed specialties that local people proudly defended. Travel, therefore, became an education for the senses as well as the mind. Trying unfamiliar dishes often became one of the most memorable parts of any journey. Markets displayed this diversity beautifully. Colorful vegetables, fresh fruits, aromatic herbs, delicate pastries, steaming bowls of noodles, sweet desserts prepared for festivals. The atmosphere constantly stimulated curiosity. Young people eagerly sampled new tastes whenever circumstances allowed. Art continued evolving alongside society. Painting became more realistic in some periods, more expressive in others. Artists experimented with landscapes, flowers, birds, mountains, rivers, and scenes from everyday life. Young apprentices carefully studied these masterpieces. Imitation formed the first step toward originality. Every artist learned established techniques before developing a personal style. The same principle applied to music. Students mastered traditional melodies before composing new ones. innovation respected tradition instead of rejecting it. This balance became one of Chinese civilization's defining strengths, respecting the past while embracing gradual improvement. The relationship between cities and villages also shaped youth experiences. Village teenagers enjoyed close relationships with nature. They recognized nearly every family within their community. Life followed predictable seasonal rhythms. City teenagers encountered greater diversity. They met travelers, observed new fashions, visited bookshops, attended theatrical performances, watched craftsmen specializing in countless professions. Neither lifestyle was necessarily better. Each offered different opportunities. Some village youths dreamed of cities. Some city residents longed for quieter countryside life. Human beings often imagine happiness existing somewhere else. This tendency appears repeatedly throughout history. Another fascinating element of medieval youth involved personal discipline. Daily routines encouraged consistency. Students practiced calligraphy. Artisans repeated techniques. Musicians rehearsed endlessly. Archers refined accuracy through thousands of arrows. Mastery emerged gradually. Talent alone rarely impressed society. Persistent effort earned greater respect. That belief influenced generations. Children grew up hearing stories about perseverance, scholars studying by candlelight, artists perfecting one painting after another, officials remaining honest despite temptation. These examples became moral lessons passed from parents to children. Role models shaped ambitions. At the same time, mistakes remained inevitable. Young people occasionally acted impulsively. Some neglected studies, others wasted money. Friendships sometimes broke apart because of misunderstandings. History reminds us that growing up has never been a smooth journey. Learning often occurred through failure. Wise mentors understood this. Rather than expecting perfection, they encouraged improvement. Progress mattered more than flawless performance. Perhaps this explains why so many medieval writings emphasize self-cultivation. Becoming a better person required continuous effort. No one finished growing. No one completed learning. No one achieved perfect wisdom. Every day offered another opportunity to improve. As the centuries passed, generations of Chinese youth inherited remarkable traditions while quietly reshaping them for changing times. Their clothing changed, their music evolved, cities expanded, technologies improved, ideas spread farther than ever before. Yet one truth remained constant. Every teenager wondered what kind of future awaited beyond tomorrow. Every teenager hoped to earn respect, to find loyal friends, to make family proud, to discover purpose. Those hopes connected medieval youth with every generation that followed, including our own. The centuries separating us may seem enormous, but the human experience has always been built upon the same timeless questions. Who will I become? Where do I belong? And what kind of life will I leave behind? Those questions echoed through medieval China just as powerfully as they echo today, making its young generation far more familiar to us than history often suggests. As the years passed, every young person in medieval China eventually discovered a truth that no teacher could fully explain. Life rarely followed a perfect plan. A brilliant student could fail an important examination. A poor apprentice could become a respected master. A wealthy family might suddenly lose everything because of war, political change, or natural disaster. A small opportunity could unexpectedly transform an ordinary life. This uncertainty shaped the mindset of an entire generation. Young people learned to prepare carefully while accepting that some events remained beyond human control. That balance between effort and acceptance appears throughout Chinese philosophy. Work as hard as you can. Act with integrity. Respect others. Remain patient. Then accept whatever results follow. These ideas gave many teenagers emotional strength during difficult times. One subject that fascinated young people was history itself. Teachers encouraged students to study earlier dynasties, not merely to memorize names and dates, but to understand human behavior. Why had one emperor succeeded while another failed? Why did prosperous kingdoms eventually decline? How could wise leadership create peace? How could corruption destroy decades of progress? History became a guide for the future. Young scholars copied passages describing famous rulers, loyal officials, courageous generals, and brilliant thinkers. They hoped those examples would shape their own character. In this way, the past remained alive inside the minds of each new generation. Curiosity about science and invention also grew steadily. Chinese civilization produced remarkable innovations over many centuries. Paper transformed education. Printing spread knowledge. The magnetic compass improved navigation. Gunpowder eventually changed warfare. Mechanical clocks demonstrated extraordinary engineering skill. Teenagers growing up during these periods witnessed technologies that seemed revolutionary for their own age. Although they could not predict future inventions, they lived during times of remarkable creativity. Young craftsmen eagerly learned improved techniques. Merchants quickly recognized commercial opportunities. Students recorded new knowledge inside notebooks. Innovation became part of everyday life. Many teenagers developed remarkable practical intelligence through observation. A farmer noticed subtle changes in weather. A physician's apprentice recognized medicinal plants hidden among ordinary vegetation. A builder understood which types of timber lasted longest. A merchant judged quality simply by touching cloth. These skills required years of experience. Knowledge existed not only inside books, but also within hands, eyes, and memory. That practical wisdom deserved enormous respect. Family celebrations continued marking life's important moments. Births, coming-of-age ceremonies, marriages, successful examination results, seasonal festivals, ancestor commemorations. Each event strengthened family identity. Teenagers gradually realized they belonged to something larger than themselves. Generations before them had preserved traditions. Future generations would inherit them. Their own actions became another link in an endless chain. This perspective encouraged long-term thinking. Many decisions considered not merely personal benefit, but family reputation, decades into the future. Modern life often encourages immediate rewards. Medieval China frequently encouraged patience measured across generations. Friendship remained one of life's greatest treasures. Distance rarely destroyed genuine friendship. Former classmates separated by government appointments continued exchanging thoughtful letters. Merchants meeting during long journeys formed lifelong partnerships. Artists inspired one another despite living in different provinces. These relationships often survived because they rested upon shared values rather than convenience. Trust developed slowly. Once earned, it became priceless. Entertainment continued evolving. Theater became increasingly sophisticated. Storytelling traditions expanded. Musicians experimented with regional styles. Festivals introduced fresh performances each year. Young audiences eagerly embraced novelty while respecting familiar traditions. Every generation enjoys discovering something new. Medieval teenagers were no different. Another remarkable aspect of youth culture involved personal ambition. Not every ambition centered upon wealth. Many dreamed of leaving behind honorable reputations. A respected teacher, a fair official, a compassionate physician, a talented artist, a trustworthy merchant. These aspirations reflected cultural ideals, emphasizing contribution alongside personal success. Recognition mattered, but meaningful contribution mattered even more. Young women likewise pursued excellence within opportunities available to them. Some became celebrated poets. Others achieved remarkable artistic skill. Many managed large households with exceptional competence. Although historical records often emphasize men, surviving writings reveal countless women possessing intelligence, creativity, resilience, and emotional depth. Their voices continue enriching our understanding of medieval society. As cities expanded, opportunities gradually increased. Larger populations created demand for specialized professions. Bookshops employed knowledgeable staff. Printing workshops required skilled workers. Trading companies expanded. Government offices needed educated clerks. Economic growth quietly diversified career possibilities. Teenagers increasingly imagined futures extending beyond traditional occupations. Change happened gradually rather than suddenly. Yet change continued nonetheless. One lesson appears repeatedly throughout medieval Chinese writings: humility. No matter how successful someone became, arrogance remained dangerous. A scholar might pass examinations yet still have much to learn. A merchant might gain wealth yet lose respect through greed. A military commander could achieve victory but fail through overconfidence. Young people heard these warnings throughout childhood. Confidence should never replace wisdom. Success should never eliminate kindness. Power should never erase compassion. These moral lessons shaped generations. Nature still surrounded everyday existence. Morning mist drifted across rivers. Bamboo forests whispered in the wind. Cherry blossoms signaled spring. Golden fields announced harvest. Snow transformed mountain landscapes into scenes celebrated by countless painters and poets. Teenagers experience these changes directly. They watch seasons transform familiar landscapes year after year. This close relationship with nature nurtured deep appreciation for beauty. Beauty existed not only in grand palaces but also in ordinary moments. Sunlight reflecting upon water, birdsong before dawn, rain falling gently upon bamboo leaves, a lantern glowing quietly outside a family home. Such simple images filled Chinese literature because they reflected everyday experience. As young people matured into adulthood, they slowly realized that happiness rarely depended upon extraordinary events alone. It often emerged through meaningful work, strong friendships, family gatherings, learning something new, helping others, finding purpose. These ideas remain surprisingly modern despite their ancient origins. Perhaps this explains why medieval Chinese philosophy continues attracting readers around the world today. Its greatest lessons concern not merely politics or history, but human life itself. How should we treat one another? How should we respond to disappointment? How can knowledge improve character? What truly defines success? These questions never grow old. Generation after generation continues asking them. The teenagers of medieval China asked them too. Their answers reflected their own culture and time, yet their hopes, fears, ambitions, and dreams remain deeply recognizable. The more closely we examine their world, the less distant it appears. The centuries separating us begin to fade. History becomes personal, and ordinary young people step forward from the shadows of emperors and battles to remind us that they too helped shape one of history's greatest civilizations. By the final years of adolescence, many young people in medieval China understood something that children rarely noticed. Every person lived inside several different worlds at once. There was the world of family, the world of friends, the world of work, the world of learning, the world of tradition. And beyond all of them lay the vast empire itself. A teenager might spend the morning helping parents in the family business, the afternoon studying classical texts, and the evening listening to a traveler describe lands beyond the Great Wall. Each experience added another piece to their understanding of life. Identity did not appear all at once. It developed slowly. One conversation, one mistake, one success, one disappointment at a time. The pace of life encouraged reflection. Without constant distractions, people often spent long periods thinking while walking through fields, traveling between towns, or sitting quietly beside rivers. Silence was not considered uncomfortable. It created space for thought. Many famous Chinese philosophers believed wisdom grew from careful observation. Young people learned to notice details, the sound of rain before a storm, the behavior of birds before changing weather, the expressions on another person's face, the tone hidden behind spoken words. Observation became a practical skill. A merchant who observed carefully made better business decisions. A physician who noticed small symptoms treated patients more effectively. A military commander who studied the landscape protected soldiers more successfully. Attention itself became a valuable form of knowledge. Teenagers gradually realized that learning extended far beyond classrooms. Mistakes became teachers. Failure became experience. Success brought new responsibilities rather than permanent comfort. This understanding matured many young people surprisingly early. One fascinating aspect of medieval Chinese society was its respect for balance. Excess rarely received praise. Eating too much, speaking too much, boasting too much. Even working without rest could eventually become harmful. Moderation appeared repeatedly in philosophy, medicine, and education, and daily habits. Young people absorbed this lesson through countless small experiences. Life worked best when different responsibilities remained in harmony. Study balanced with rest, work balanced with family, ambition balanced with kindness, confidence balanced with humility. This idea influenced almost every part of Chinese civilization. Young artists also searched for balance. A painting required empty space as well as detailed brushwork. Music required silence between notes. Poetry depended upon rhythm as much as words. Beauty emerged through harmony rather than excess. These artistic ideas quietly shaped how teenagers viewed the world around them. Learning became an act of self-improvement rather than simple competition. Although examinations remained intensely competitive, respected teachers reminded students that true education should improve character as well as memory. An educated person ought to become more patient, more thoughtful, more compassionate. Knowledge without virtue was considered incomplete. Whether every student achieved that ideal is another question entirely. Human nature has always been complicated. Some sought learning for wisdom. Others pursued status. Most probably hoped for both. Economic life continued changing throughout the medieval period. Expanding trade created opportunities unimaginable to previous generations. Young merchants studied market trends carefully. They noticed which goods became fashionable, which regions produced exceptional silk, which ports attracted foreign ships, which roads remained safest during different seasons. Successful trade required information. Those who understood changing conditions often prospered. In many ways, merchants became experts at recognizing patterns. That ability resembled another form of education. Markets also reflected changing tastes. Fashion evolved. Decorative objects changed. Musical instruments became more refined. Books increased in variety. Young consumers influenced these trends just as younger generations influence markets today. They admired new styles, shared recommendations, copied admired individuals. Every generation quietly reshapes culture through everyday preferences. Health remained another important concern. Without modern medicine, families relied upon experienced physicians, herbal remedies, careful diets, and traditional medical knowledge developed over centuries. Young people learned basic health practices from parents and grandparents. They discovered which herbs relieved common illnesses, which foods suited different seasons, why proper rest mattered. Many of these lessons blended practical observation with traditional medical philosophy. Although medieval medicine differed greatly from modern science, it represented centuries of accumulated experience. Respect for teachers extended beyond childhood. Former students often continued seeking advice long after completing formal education. Mentorship became a lifelong relationship. A trusted teacher offered guidance during difficult decisions, career choices, family challenges, personal disappointments. Wisdom gained through experience deserved respect. Young people rarely believed they already knew everything. Perhaps that humility made continued learning easier. Of course, not every teenager followed society's expectations perfectly. Some disliked endless studying. Some preferred wandering the countryside instead of practicing calligraphy. Some dreamed about adventure while parents expected stability. Some questioned traditions privately, even while respecting them publicly. These quiet differences remind us that individuality has always existed. No generation has ever been completely identical. Historical records naturally emphasize rules. Real life always contained exceptions. That is one reason history remains endlessly fascinating. People consistently surprise us. Nature continued inspiring dreams. Standing upon a mountain peak, a teenager could watch clouds drifting beneath distant cliffs. Walking beside the Yellow River or the Yangtze, another could imagine countless travelers who had followed the same waters for centuries. Watching lanterns floating during festivals, children imagined limitless possibilities waiting beyond tomorrow. Ordinary moments often inspired extraordinary hopes. The future remained uncertain. No one could predict which dynasty would eventually rise or fall, which invention would transform society, which unknown child might someday become a famous scholar, artist, explorer, or official. History moved forward because each generation inherited unfinished work from the previous one. Medieval China's Generation Z, if we borrow that modern expression, did exactly what young people have always done. They learned from parents, questioned quietly, made mistakes, built friendships, fell in love, dreamed about success, faced disappointment, adapted to change, created new ideas, and slowly transformed the civilization they inherited. They lived without electricity, without automobiles, without the internet. Yet they laughed, they worried, they celebrated, they argued, they hoped, they imagined brighter futures. Those experiences connect them to us more strongly than centuries of technological difference ever could. History often appears distant until we remember one simple truth. Every emperor was once a child. Every famous scholar was once an uncertain student. Every respected artisan was once an inexperienced apprentice. Every great civilization was built not only by legendary figures, but also by millions of ordinary young people whose names have been forgotten, yet whose lives quietly shaped the world around them. Their stories deserve to be remembered, not because they were extraordinary, but because they were profoundly human. As our journey through medieval China comes to an end, one final question remains. Were medieval Chinese teenagers really so different from today's Generation Z? At first glance, the answer seems obvious. They lived without electricity, without the internet, without smartphones, without social media, without modern schools, cars, cameras, or instant communication. Their world was built around emperors, dynasties, family honor, and traditions that had developed over thousands of years. Our world seems almost unrecognizable by comparison. Yet history rarely ends where first impressions begin. When we look beyond technology, beyond clothing, beyond architecture, and beyond the passing centuries, we begin to recognize something remarkably familiar. Every generation searches for identity. Every generation asks where it belongs. Every generation dreams about a better future. The teenagers of medieval China did exactly that. Some dreamed of passing the Imperial examinations and becoming respected officials. Some dreamed of mastering painting or calligraphy. Others wanted to build prosperous businesses. Some hoped simply to protect their families from hardship. Some wanted to travel beyond the places they had known since childhood. Others wished to spend peaceful lives close to home, different dreams, the same human heart. Friendship meant everything. Long conversations with trusted companions, laughing together during festivals, encouraging one another after failure, celebrating success without jealousy, standing beside each other during difficult moments. These friendships created memories that lasted for decades. Love also remained timeless. Although marriages were often arranged, emotions could never be arranged so easily. Poets wrote about longing. Artists painted scenes of quiet affection. Stories celebrated loyalty, sacrifice, and devotion. Young hearts still raced when they admired someone. Hope still mixed with uncertainty. The language changed, the emotions did not. Pressure existed everywhere. Parents expected responsibility. Teachers demanded discipline. Society valued reputation. The future often depended upon examinations, family decisions, or opportunities beyond one's control. Modern students understand academic pressure. Medieval students understood it just as deeply. Failure hurt. Success brought relief. Perseverance remained essential. Young people learned resilience because life required it. Technology transformed over the centuries. Human character changed far more slowly. Curiosity survived every dynasty. Creativity survived every political change. Humor survived hardship. Music survived war. Poetry survived the rise and fall of emperors. Hope survived uncertainty. Generation after generation inherited the achievements of those who came before, then quietly added something new. No single teenager believed they were changing history. Yet together, they transformed one of the world's oldest civilizations. A young apprentice improved a technique. A student preserved an important text. A merchant introduced unfamiliar goods. An artist created a new style. A poet inspired future generations. A teacher encouraged one struggling student. Small actions accumulated. Centuries later, they became history. Perhaps that is history's greatest lesson. Civilizations are not built only by famous rulers. They are built by ordinary people living ordinary days with extraordinary determination. The young farmer who woke before sunrise. The apprentice who practiced until his hands ached. The scholar studying beneath dim candlelight. The daughter learning poetry from her mother. The musician rehearsing one melody hundreds of times. The traveler carrying stories from distant provinces. None of them imagined that people living hundreds of years later would still be interested in their lives. Yet here we are, listening, learning, recognizing pieces of ourselves within their stories. History has a remarkable way of reminding us that humanity shares far more than it divides. Languages change, governments change, technology changes, fashion changes, cities grow, empires disappear. But people continue searching for purpose. They continue protecting those they love. They continue hoping tomorrow will be better than today. That truth connects every generation, including ours. So what was Generation Z culture really like in medieval China? It was disciplined yet imaginative, and traditional yet constantly evolving, respectful yet quietly curious, ambitious yet deeply connected to family, competitive yet capable of lifelong friendship, rooted in ancient customs while always looking toward the future. It was not modern, but it was unmistakably youthful. The teenagers of medieval China laughed, questioned, learned, dreamed, failed, succeeded, loved, and grew into adults who shaped the course of history in countless unseen ways. Perhaps the greatest surprise is not how different they were from us. Perhaps the greatest surprise is how familiar they feel once we truly understand them. The centuries separating us begin to disappear. Instead of strangers living in a distant age, we begin to see ordinary young people facing extraordinary circumstances with courage, curiosity, and hope. And maybe that is the real power of history. Not simply teaching us what happened, but reminding us that behind every dynasty, every empire, every invention, and every famous name were millions of ordinary lives, each filled with dreams that mattered just as much to the people who lived them as ours matter to us today. The story of medieval China's young generation is not merely the story of the past. It is the story of youth itself, a story repeated in every century, a story still being written